Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm the social solipsist, and this week I watched 3 Days of the Condor from 1975. Now, 3 Days of the Condor stars Robert Redford, who we saw some weeks ago in The Old Man and the Gun. And this is, quote unquote, young Robert Redford. Though it is fascinating because despite this movie being now 46 years old, I think I have that right? Yeah. 46 years old, and despite Robert Redford's age now, he still looks like a bit of an old man in this film. Now, it wasn't by any means his first film. It was well into his career, but nonetheless, it is fascinating to realize that even 46 years ago, Robert Redford still had the to some extent an old man face. And yet, despite that, is often cited as a handsome actor. I'm not going to disagree with either of those. Actually, I think he does, set a striking, handsome leading man type of has that face, but at the same time, he does have the wrinkles and the like hard lines of a man who's lived a hard life, or lived more years than it seems. But I digress. Robert Redford is the main character, and 3 Days of the Condor is a spy thriller-ish. Obviously, we've watched. If you're watching all the movies I am, which you're probably not, but if you've even watched this entire series, you've noticed some trends, and I've talked previously about spy movies and political movies and things from some of this era already. Even just some weeks ago, talking about Trial of the Chicago 7. This was made in 1975. It's set ostensibly at the same time. Prominently features the World Trade Center, which had only been built in 1973, and is set almost exclusively in New York City. So it's pretty, for a variety of reasons, is tied to a very specific time and place, and certain politics of a certain era. I am going to not delve into the specifics because it could sort of spoil some of the plot beats as it evolves in a very tertiary way that probably wouldn't affect anyone, but I don't even want to risk it. But there are the politics of the era and the relationship between the international relationships and the international events of the preceding few years definitely leave their mark on this film in some fascinating ways. To that point, I think, well, let me step back for a second and say that I really enjoy the restraint that this movie has. This is very much, despite being a so-called spy thriller, it does not fall into the camp of the sort of old school James Bond type with the swaggering leading man. It also does not fall into the action-packed gunfights, certainly not of the modern day, but even the stuff that was much more common in the 70s and things like, or the late 70s, early 80s, that sort of stuff. It avoids all that. It is subtle and restrained, and evolves in a very natural way that leads you on the story in a way that really sort of encourages you to discover it yourself. That said, there are some aspects of it that I think will be difficult to pick up on if you are a person, a younger person who was not uh, alive in those times and have also not studied the history of the United States and international politics in the 70s, um, there will be some stuff that is sort of either gets completely lost, or doesn't make sense, or otherwise just doesn't land uh, particularly strongly as a result. So having some of that political awareness, I think, that would have obviously been much more common in the time that it was released, it may not hit as hard these days if you're not already a bit familiar. The other part of this that I find really fascinating is that rather than a James Bond type of thing where they have, Q with the tech and all that stuff, this is very grounded in a realistic portrayal of, well, realistic with air quotes, but of espionage in the 70s, the operations of the CIA, and the way in which, you know, uh, um, espionage agents, or agents of spy agencies, for want of a better phrase, or for missing a better phrase because it's a little late at night. What type of skills and what things they would actually potentially have access to. There is also a sort of technological literacy that is required to understand some of what's going on in this era. Robert Redford's character is he's got a background in telecommunications, basically, and was a lineman in the army, or in the one of the armed forces. And so, if you're not familiar with like how telecommunications from earlier eras work, and how basically how old school phone switching works, and some of these other things, some of the things that he does aren't going to make any sense. They're going to seem like magic, probably, because, I mean, understanding how phone tones and like clipping into existing lines and these other things, these are much more. They're not that complicated, but if you're not familiar with the technology and most movies don't bother to show the the niceties of spying, and this does. So I find that really fascinating, but I can certainly see it being like going over some people's heads, who may not be familiar with old school telecommunications. But I digress. Those are just some points I have about the general thing. Overall, I quite like this film. Obviously, like I said, the restraint that it uses in what it does and doesn't show and tell. Of all the movies in recent memory that I've seen, this definitely ranks up near the top in terms of refusing to explain anything that's going on until the exact moment that it's pertinent. I was trying to come up with a proper analogy, and I realized that I've never had to make this analogy before because very few films in general seem to assemble their film this way. But I think something that's very common, sort of a structural analogy that is very common in a lot of Hollywood films, regardless of genre these days, is that, to use a jigsaw puzzle as an analogy here, many times films basically amount to the first act is essentially finding all the edge pieces and putting the frame around the puzzle, right? So you understand the setup, essentially. You have some sense, you don't know exactly what the whole thing's going to look like, but you have a sense of the framework and the extents and where it's going to go, even if you don't quite understand everything that's in there. And then as you go through the film, you fill in chunks of that puzzle. By comparison, this film takes a very much like strict left to right approach where it assembles one edge of the puzzle and works to the side. And like it is very much in following Redford's character as he learns more about what is going on in the story, and comes to understand more about his situation and the situation of others around him. And it works really, really well, with a few exceptions. I appreciate as well that it does not present him as in any way invincible or even particularly competent. He is a very realistic feeling character. However, I mean, it's right on the poster here, so I might as well talk about it. There is a romance subplot with him and Faye Dunaway, and it is not wholly without merit, but the way that it evolves is both troubling, to say the least, and then evolves in an unreasonably fast manner. Now, I will say that this is a heavily adapted screenplay from an actual spy novel. This does have a little bit of that like odor of, manly spy novel, where, whether it's Bond or otherwise, in addition to all the action, spy, an old, your dad's or your granddad's spy novel always has the female character to be wooed and won. And I don't know whether, I haven't read the book. I don't know whether that's the case in the book. The way their relationship evolves in the film, I don't think works very well. It's got some moments that are smart and shirk the tropes, but on the whole, I don't think it works that well. And a lot of the film, I think, could be tightened up with the complete removal of Faye Dunaway's character. That said, I think she does an admirable job in the role. Faye Dunaway is a good actor. So she does a great job. For all my complaints, she works with what she was given very well. To talk about the acting a little more, I guess, as I said with The Old Man and the Gun, I don't particularly think of Robert Redford as being a particularly great actor, nor even particularly charismatic. This movie doesn't do a lot to change that. It does show a little bit more range, perhaps, but not a lot. He sort of visually fits the right aesthetic for what you might sort of hope or expect for his character as he's delivered. But whether or not he wouldn't have been better replaced by somebody else with a little bit more acting range, I would say I would probably trade him for someone else. But that's, not a huge deal. Just as a sidebar, I don't know if I knew this before and forgot it or had just learned it, but apparently, the reason that Robert Redford has a role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is basically because some of the ideas for the Winter Soldier are cribbed from this film, basically. Uh, don't let that get you in like any particular mindset that's thinking about the Winter Soldier is not going to spoil this film. But it is an interesting connection that I didn't realize was the case. And so, yeah, apparently they cast him, they cast Robert Redford in the Winter Soldier to sort of pay homage to the connection and the inspiration there. So it is kind of fascinating in that way. The plot overall is, like I said, it's a little sparse, but in an intentional way. It's trying to deliver intrigue in a way that isn't like both is not hamming it up nor like over dramatizing it. It's genuinely like an exploration and a bit of a mystery that sort of has to be uncovered procedurally, and I think they do a really good job with how that is explored as the over the course of the film's runtime. Dialogue is likewise sparse, generally well written, generally well delivered. Characters, again, with sort of it being careful of how much to say, when, and by whom and why. It is careful not to have, basically to let you be a fly on the wall of a lot of conversations, but not necessarily give you enough context for those scenes to be informative. Where a lot of films, especially, spy films, action films, these other things, and these days will place you in a room. Well, you have your protagonist, you follow them for a while, and then they place you in another room with the villain, let you see the villain monologue for a bit, talk about their plan that the main character doesn't know about, so you're sort of pre-informed of what's going to happen. This does something much the opposite, which is to cut to those, alternate viewpoints, only to add more to the mystery and more to the intrigue in a way that works extremely well and is, I think, pretty rare in general, not just these days, but in the whole of cinema, at least what I've consumed. Tonally, it keeps its tone pretty well over the course of it. It does have these ups and downs of the drama, the thriller, the sort of even moments of comedy or lightness in a way that makes the whole thing flow really well. Again, with sort of the exception of this romance subplot that I don't think works great, but honestly, I think it's pretty ignorable, and again, is not entirely without merit. What is fascinating is that, like, in terms of the cinematography and the way this is shot, I have to imagine in no small part because it is primarily shot in New York City and not just indoors. There are scenes on the street that there are aspects of or parts of this film that clearly seem to be the sort of like, we're going to work with what we've got stuff. Not like, it doesn't cross over into like the guerrilla filmmaking style, but it's sort of like, yeah, you clearly didn't have time to set this up to be like incredibly pretty. And so there's a little bit of a like cinematic difference between interior shots on sets and exterior stuff like on the street. But nonetheless, I think that actually probably works to its advantage in terms of helping to sort of transition you in a way that is surprisingly unjarring between the tone of scenes that are happening indoors versus outdoors. Cinematography in general is not really impressive. I actually love the opening sequence of this film. The credits rolling over the opening is A plus, fantastic stuff. Not just because of the credits, although credits credit where credit is due. The credit delivery itself works well, but the film that it is rolling over also is really excellent. Probably one of the best shots in the whole film. And yeah, on the whole, the whole thing, the world feels very lived in. Everyone feels very believable. The whole thing is delivered in a satisfying manner. And satisfies a lot of different things you may be looking for in a spy thriller, as long as you're not looking for shitty 2000s action film, which is not what we're here for with a spy thriller. So, despite some issues, holds up really well. If this is your jam, I think there's a lot to appreciate about this. I think it's a film that is probably largely forgotten in this day and age. But yeah, I think it's worth your time and worth a watch. It's an interesting one to be sure. If you have watched it before or watch it as a result of this video, leave your thoughts in general, and then let me know what you think. Yeah. Anyway, this has been Solipsist Watched. I'm the Social Solipsist. Thank you guys for watching another episode. I think in the maybe I'm not sure. I don't want to make any promises, but maybe the following not review. The following video in this series may be on a similar sort of thing. We'll see. No promises. I'll see you guys next time.